How do you go about preparing for your law school interviews? What even is a law school interview? Does every school interview? Do you have to do an interview? What's the gist of this whole interview process? For those of you who are new, my name is Sydney Montgomery. I am the CEO of Montgomery Admissions Consulting, and I specialize in working with first generation and minority law school applicants. And today we're talking about one of my favorite topics. We're talking about interviews. Now, it's one of my favorite topics because I actually used to be an alumni interviewer for Princeton, and I really enjoyed that process. I really enjoyed talking to students as they were in the process of making their decision, or even deciding kind of what schools would be good to apply to. I loved learning about them. I loved asking them questions about what things brought them joy, what excited them. It's really no surprise that I ended up as an admissions consultant, looking back on it. I know that some of you have already begun receiving interviews, and some of you might be like, whoa, 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 I'm still applying. What do you mean people have already started receiving interviews? Do not stress out. This process is rolling. This process is, I like to call law school admissions like the Wild West. You can't really compare your journey to anyone else's journey and your timing to anyone else's timing. But I thought that it would be good to come and talk a little bit about interviews, whether this is pertinent to your life this week or whether it'll be pertinent to you, 2 months from now. We can all kind of start to prepare for interviews. So we're going to cover three main things. We're first going to cover the difference between informational and evaluative interviews. Then we're going to cover the different kinds of interview formats and types. And we're going to cover some common questions that you should prepare for interviews, including my personal favorite question, which we will get to. But like I said, if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments below. Let me know where you are. Let me know if you have any pending interviews coming up. I would kind of love to help you through that process. But first, what is the point of an interview, and what's the difference between an informational interview and an evaluative interview? An informational interview is something that if you have the opportunity to do at a law school, you absolutely should take it. Shout out to New York Law School because I think they have one of the most accessible, open, friendly admission staff, and they always have places on their website for prospective students, admitted students, waitlisted students to kind of schedule a Zoom interview. And those interviews are informational. It's just for you to learn a little bit more about the school and for the admissions committee to learn about a little bit more about you, but it's not necessarily evaluative in the sense that it is part of the decision, what you say is part of the decision that they're making, for your admissions. So informational interviews are just that. They're just information gathering. It's really more for you, if we're going to be honest. It's really more for you to ask admissions those questions that you have to discern whether the school would be a good fit for you or not, whether they have programs that would be helpful, what their financial aid might look like, if any, what support they have for students that already have families or for veterans. It's your chance to get some of these questions answered. Now, a lot of these questions are already on the school's website. So if you're going to do an informational interview, you want to have questions that are not necessarily questions that you can find on the website. This is not really dissimilar from talking to an admissions rep at an LSAC fair. It's basically just a private LSAC fair, just in the same way that no one is really making all these notes on your file based on the questions that you might ask in a forum. That's sort of the same mindset that you should have about these informational interviews. They are really there for information gathering purposes. This is different from an evaluative interview. And most law schools do not do evaluative interviews, but many have started doing more with the increase in technology and use of video and Zoom, and we'll talk about that. Sometimes these can look like scholarship interviews, which are definitely evaluative. Those interviews count, and they're part of the decision-making process in terms of giving you a scholarship. And sometimes those interviews are important to the admissions process itself. Some schools choose to do evaluative interviews either as a standard part of their process or because they maybe are on the fence and they want to know a little bit more about you. They only offer interviews maybe to candidates that they're thinking of admitting, but they're not really sure. Or because they really like you and they just want to get to know you more. I think students sometimes read too much into an interview offer. They're like, oh my God, do they hate me? Do they love me? I've seen it go both ways. I've seen students text me and they're like, why do they want to interview me? Did I do something wrong? Are they thinking of not accepting me? Like, what's going on here? No one else got an interview. Other people just got in without an interview. Why am I getting an interview? An interview is never a bad thing. Never. Why? Because they're very busy people. They're just incredibly busy people. And if they're taking time out of their day to talk to you, it is certainly not just to bring you on Zoom to say, you know what, we're just going to deny you. We just hated your application. No, they just would have sent you an email or denied you in your portal and saved everyone lots of time. If they are interviewing you, even if it's because you're maybe a borderline candidate, it's always a good thing. They are spending extra time getting to know you when they did not have to. So you should never feel kind of concerned about receiving an interview offer like you've done something bad. On the other hand, an interview doesn't always mean you're getting in. There's really no guarantees in admissions, and I say that often, and also there's no absolutes in admissions, right? Admissions is kind of an art, not a science. There's a lot of gray. But I would say that if you get an interview offer, again, they're spending extra time when they didn't have to. And so that's always a good thing, but you could interview and still not get in. So I don't want you to think of it as a slam dunk either. But it is, generally speaking, a positive thing because they did not have to spend time. We've kind of parsed the difference a little bit between like interviews that are, part of the admissions process, either part of their decision in deciding to admit you or part of their decision in giving you a scholarship. But I now want to break down what those different kinds of interviews are. So there are some interviews that are completely pre-recorded. This has been what I've seen an increase of in the last 2 years, I think, with COVID and just people's comfortability with video and Zoom. And usually in those interviews, and that can be either, just as part of the normal admissions process, or that can be after you're waitlisted. With those interviews, usually you get the questions in advance, and you're kind of given a time. Every school has a different platform, but you might be given, 30 seconds or 60 seconds to answer every question. And so you have sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you have the questions beforehand. Sometimes you just have the sample questions. And you want to kind of get yourself in a good setup. Maybe, don't wear, I'm in a comfy sweater today. Wear something nice, but you don't have to wear a blazer or a suit. But you do want to wear something nice, maybe like you're going to church or dinner with your grandparents or something like that. You want to get into a nice background, a quiet area, and you want to make sure that you're having good eye contact with the camera. You want to be personable. So I think sometimes with the pre-recorded interviews, we tend to be like, my name is Cindy Montgomery, and I'm interested in going to law school because I would like to help children reach their full potential, and I would like to be a child advocate. And the reasons why I want to go to your law school are because it is in a really good city that will give me a lot of great opportunities, and I will be able to network with my colleagues. And that's just, first off, you can tell I have terrible posture because I got real tall. But that's just not very personable, right? You want your personality to shine through. You want to seem like you're having a conversation with someone. Much in the same way that even though I'm talking to a camera, I feel often like I'm having a conversation with you. I am really trying to speak as if you're right there, right in front of me, even though you're on the other side of the screen. But I hope that you guys get a good sense of my personality through these videos. I'm very smiley and bubbly, and like this is kind of who I am, right? I'm one of those people that, I know people have like different personalities for different situations. I'm kind of like the same person, just that seems a little exhausting, and I just like only know one way to be. So this is like me. This is me when I interview for things. This is me when I talk to you guys. This is me when I'm working with my students. This is me with my parents. This is me with my sister. Like, this is me. And so I try to make sure that my personality comes through the camera. And I think that can be really hard sometimes for students because you're like, oh my God, this is my law school interview. But like, they're also people. I used to say, when I used to give talks to high school students, and I love giving talks to high school students. I really look forward to doing that, once COVID kind of calms down a bit. But, I used to say there are two different ways to nail an interview, especially if you're thinking of a job interview. I actually used to I used to run human resources for Aristotle Circle Peers, which is the peers division of a larger educational like consulting and planning firm. And that was really interesting. I spent, about, 7 years in HR, and it was fascinating. It was like an experience that I didn't necessarily seek out, but one that I'm so truly grateful for. And it taught me a lot also about hiring. And I've hired people. We have a team. There's 8 people here that work for my company. And so I will say that there are 2 ways to nail any kind of interview. You can either be the most qualified applicant, or you can make the interviewer fall in love with you. And you really only have control over one of those, right? You may or may not be the most qualified candidate. There may always be someone more qualified than you. That's just kind of life. But you can control the connection that you make with the person that you're interviewing with. And if they really like you, and I know this is true for me, like both opportunities that I've received and opportunities that I've given, I have given opportunities and received opportunities because I really liked the other person on the other side. And I felt like, man, I just feel like they'd be great to work with. And maybe they weren't the most qualified or the most impressive person on paper, but I felt like they'd be really great to work with. And that's kind of what you want to be doing in these interviews too, right? Of course, you want to be professional. It is professional school, but you want your personality to come through. You don't want to seem like kind of like a robot. If you're a bubbly, smiley person, I want to see that like really great smile. If that's not you, that's okay. But whatever your personality is, even if you're more quiet or reserved, just try to have that, come through a little bit. Now, so those are the kind of the pre-recorded interviews, which again, it can be a little bit harder because you're just talking to a screen, but I want you to really pretend like there's someone on the other side. Now, of course, there's just normal Zoom interviews, and I think by now we all have like, a master's degree in Zoom University. So you should have no problem connecting to people over Zoom. But if you need to practice, have a video chat with your friend. Just practice the questions, and we're going to get into what those common questions are. Now, there are also alumni interviews, and alumni interviews are interesting, right? Because so whereas like, normal kind of Zoom interviews are sometimes with the admissions dean or someone in the admissions office, the alumni interviews, I don't say they carry less weight because that's not necessarily true at every school. But they're also not the ones that are fully making the decision. They're going to kind of write probably a report or a summary or something that's going to go to admissions. So usually it's good to come prepared with your resume and make sure that they have that beforehand. But you really don't need to spend time talking, and you really shouldn't in any of these interviews spend time talking about these are my stats and these, because like the alumni doesn't really care. And honestly, admissions already has that. So it's really not a topic that you need. And then there are the group interviews. Most notorious is the Georgetown group interview. This is what I tell people. Be a normal human. So you kind of want to be participatory, you want to be engaging, but you don't want to be obnoxious. You don't want to be that person that always has their hand, that person that's always answering all the questions and talking over people. You guys know who I'm talking about. Some of you are those people. This is a moment to check yourself. Because that's why it's a group interview. It's also to see how you interact well with others. If you are just a normally kind, conscientious person, and you can also give answers that are not surface level and shallow, but answers that are really deep and introspective, you'll be great. But you do want to make sure that part of what they're looking at is your ability to work in a group setting, to work well with others. And so don't go into their interview thinking, I'm just going to answer every single question, and I'm just going to, talk over everyone, and I'm going to show how smart I am. It's a little different with the group interviews being over Zoom. I remember my in-person one. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of teamwork and team building. But you do want to be kind of that good citizen to other people that are in the room. So we've covered pre-recorded interviews, Zoom interviews. I mean, I guess theoretically some schools are maybe doing live in-person interviews, but it's very rare. Alumni interviews, and then the group interviews. So now the third thing that I want to cover is what are some of those common questions, and what is my personal favorite question? So my favorite question of all time is, tell me a little bit about yourself. I love that question. Everyone hates this question. I love this question because I'm listening for what you're saying and I'm listening for what you're not saying, right? This is an opportunity where what you don't say also speaks volumes. What you think is important in this little vignette is, it speaks a lot. Tell me a little bit about yourself is not necessarily tell me what's on your resume. I think some people hear that, but it's tell me a little bit about yourself. What's important to you? Who are you? What are your motivations? What do I need to know about you in a quick snapshot? Yes, I've probably read your personal statement. I've probably read your supplemental essays, but I want to know what you decide to tell me in this short period of time. So tell me a little bit about yourself. That is actually when I do my new client consults, it's also one of the first questions that I ask because I'm also listening to hear what's important to you, what your values are, what your motivations are, so I can understand a little bit about your character and your personality to see if we're going to be a good fit. I don't work with everyone. It's important to me that, we have kind of a good fit and that our values are aligned. And so that's really important to me, and I'm sure that's really important to the interviewer as well. Now, some just basic standard questions, of course. Why do you want to go to law school? Which you should have, it should be so beat into you by the time you get to this question. I work with my students, and if you're taking my personal statement course, you'll know there's a whole module in developing that really succinct, 1 to 2 sentence why law statement, and it's so important. And when you get to this question in your interview, you're like, oh my God, I know this answer like the back of my hand. Sydney has just, beat it into me. I'm good, I got this question. Why do you want to go to this law school? What about this law school appeals to you? What do you hope to contribute to this law school? Those are all kind of variations of very similar questions. You don't want to just repeat what's in your why this school essay if you wrote one, but you do want to have, I would say, 3 strong points. When people give speeches, there's an art to speech writing, and they do say that 3 strong points is, it's good because there's structure. Everyone loves structure. I love structure in an essay. I love structure in a speech. I love structure in a small interview question because I can follow it. Humans are trained to process things in patterns that we are familiar with. And so, there are 3 reasons why I'm really excited about your law school. This, and this. Maybe give a sentence for each, right? This is not, please do not talk for 5 minutes. There's also that nice rule of like how long is an answer good, but not too long, right? You also don't want to answer this too short. So definitely practice with someone. It's something that I do. I prep my students for interviews, but practice with someone, your mom, your sibling, your best friend, your partner. Say these questions out loud. It's not enough to just write them down, but really practice saying them so you don't get tripped up over your words. You don't want to feel like you're memorizing it when you're going to do it, but you just want to have some comfortability with the words if interviewing is not something that you do often. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Why do you want to go to law school? What about this law school appeals to you? What is the accomplishment you are most proud of? This can be from your resume or not. This probably should be on your resume, but what is the accomplishment you're most proud of? And conversely, what is the thing you are least proud of on your resume? That one's a little bit trickier because you're like everything. I like everything on my resume. But think through that. That could be, a place for you to do some more introspective work. It's very similar to kind of, what's one of your greatest weaknesses, but it's a little bit different, although that's a good question to prep as well. How do you work well in a team or group setting? again, they do kind of want students that are going to be good citizens of the law school community, that are going to care for one another, that are going to help each other out. And so be honest, right? Not everyone needs to be the leader in a group setting. Sometimes you're a good supporting role. Sometimes you're a great listener. Sometimes you're the problem solver. Sometimes you're the mediator. Sometimes you're the person that makes sure that everyone feels included. If you haven't actually already, the Clifton Gallup Strengths is a fantastic tool just to even get to know yourself. We did it with my team. We unlocked all 34 of our strengths, and they like to say there's no weaknesses. They're just strengths that you're, stronger at, and then less strong strengths, I suppose. Consistency is not very high on my list, but taking one of those, or even like a True Colors, or any of those things to kind of understand yourself more, might be very helpful for these kinds of questions when you're asked about how you work well in a team setting, because that might give you a little bit more insight into who you are as a person as well. We kind of touched on what you hope to contribute at this law school, and I think that's really important too. It's not even sometimes the reasons why you want to go to law school are their programs, or their centers, their clinics, the geography, a professor, but what do you hope to contribute? Might be like, what do you hope to join, or what impact do you want to leave at the law school? How will the law school be different because you were here, is another way of phrasing that question. And then I would say, where do you see your legal career in 5 years or 10 years? Could be 3 years. Maybe try to have some points for that. Listen, you can change your mind. No one is holding you to that, but try to have a sense, and it kind of goes back to the reasons why I really push my students on the why law statement, what you want to do. Some of you have not figured out what you want to do after law school, like at all. You're just going to kind of go and figure it out. And if they ask you this question, you might really not know what to say. And so I definitely want to encourage you to think a little bit, maybe look at some people's career paths, see what they are, understanding that you are not going to graduate from law school and become in-house counsel for NBC. That is just probably not going to happen. You are also not likely to graduate from law school and, go straight to clerking for the Supreme Court. It's not likely. So you want to make sure that your answers are kind of realistic and have an understanding of the way that the legal profession works and the development therein. Of course, you want to have questions for them. They're going to ask you, what questions do you have? You want to prepare at least 2 questions. Again, not something that's on the website. Something that really still kind of demonstrates maybe a part of you, or something that you're really passionate about or interested in, that you can then ask them to kind of start that conversation. Of course, there could be more questions. I don't want to bombard you with a really long list, but those are some of the most common questions that you will get in a law school interview. And again, for some schools, many schools don't interview at all, but for some schools, the interview is mostly informational. For some schools, the interview is evaluative, but it is a standard part of their process. Everyone who gets admitted has gone through an interview. For some schools, they only interview for maybe certain scholarships, or for some schools, they only interview in certain situations or certain candidates. If it's a scholarship-specific interview, you do want to make sure that you're able to answer questions that might be specific to that scholarship, or the career path that scholarship is for. If it's a scholarship for first-gen students, right, you might be asked a little bit about your background, or maybe how being first-gen has contributed to your educational career. You might be asked, some things about why public interest is important to you if you're doing a public interest scholarship, or what you hope to gain, or just some of your values therein. So you want to make sure that you are practicing and prepping your interview questions with somebody. Usually they're pretty short, maybe 15, 20 minutes. On the high end, they might be closer to an hour, but usually I would say between 15 and 25 minutes is pretty standard for an interview. The pre-recorded interviews are much shorter. It's usually 3 to 4 questions with about 60 seconds to answer. So really, you're really done in like 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to remind you that in the links below, I have put 2 free guides. One is a free guide on brainstorming your personal statement, and another is a free guide on brainstorming your diversity statement. So hopefully that will help you guys think through these things as you are drafting and wrapping up your applications. I know many of you are trying to hit submit this weekend or in a couple of weeks, and I know we will all be very happy when applications are submitted and we can kind of move on to the next phase, which is preparing for interviews and, responding to waitlist offers and writing letters of continued interest and figuring out scholarships. It's also a really great time for me to remind you that if you haven't started thinking about outside scholarships and applying to outside scholarships, you want to be doing some research for that, because not all schools give need-based aid, and so you want to be maximizing your financial future. So guys, I am so excited for you. I am excited for you to hit submit on your applications, hopefully in the next few weeks. I am excited for you to prepare for interviews. Let me know how it goes. Let me know what questions you have about interviews. I love interviews. I love interview season. If you ever need interview prep, definitely reach out to me. I'd be happy to set something up with you, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. Talk to you soon.